Hey, my friends, let's talk about the essentials that go into a preparedness pack. And regardless if it's a go bag or get home bag or a bug out bag or a bailout bag or whatever kind of bag, typically the preparedness packs have the core essentials that remain the same for the most part. It just depends, of course, on your skill level and if you have any specific uses, or any kind of needs. And of course, where you live in the world and all these things. So there's factors, but for the most part, the actual core loadout is pretty close to the same. Now, I have a list, and some of these things on the list are more essential than others. Once again, just depending on your skill level and what your needs are. But I think it's important to kind of cover as many as possible here. So if you're new to preparedness, this commentary would be helpful for you to kind of understand some of the essentials out there that would be recommended to have in your pack if you're building a pack. So let's jump into the list. And the first thing that I think of is water. Dehydration is a very horrible experience. If you've never experienced it, you don't ever want to. And it is something that can give you a lot of problems. And of course, it can kill you if you go on with it too long. So having water in your bag is a big deal. And of course, you're going to need some type of vessel to hold that water. It's up to your preference, really. Some people like the stainless steel bottles, titanium bottles. It could just be like a Nalgene bottle that's made of like polymer. But whatever it is, you're going to need water in a water bottle. And of course, there's going to be a point in time that you're going to consume all that water. And I would recommend at least 1 to 2 liters to have in your bag. But at some point, that's going to be depleted and you're going to need more. So you're going to need some type of filtration system. So a water filter is going to be obvious. Now, there's so many different types of water filters, just like water bottles out there. It's just kind of the sky's the limit. So you might want to look into your own research and see what's available in your area to see what you can afford at this time and all that. The next thing that I would say is an essential is to have various forms of shelter. So besides the clothes on our body, you want to look at, rain gear. It could be a rain suit or a poncho and various things to resist wind. Cold wind can really drastically reduce your core body temperature. It can just rob you of your body heat. So you need that. And also, of course, more long-term solutions like a tarp system, a tent system, or a hammock system. There's a lot there to unpack. So you might want to do a lot of research on those to see which one's best for you. Some people like to kind of use combinations, like a tarp and a hammock together. Some people just go with a hammock and they have various techniques of how to insulate their hammock. Some people just don't have the skills, or even the desire to have a hammock or to learn how to set up a tarp shelter. So they just go with a tent. It just, once again, goes along the lines of how much skill do you have at your disposal. Now, I want to get into this particular topic here of electronics a little bit deep, and then I'm going to pull out and go back through the list of the remaining items. So when we look at electronics, though, the first thing that I'm thinking of is what type of battery am I using here? You might want to be looking at that, and you might ask, why is the battery type so important? Because there's different capacities depending on the type of batteries you have. So also some batteries are just a lot more common than others. And so we know for a fact, if you look at the sales records globally, that the AA battery is by far the number one selling battery. In fact, the AA battery in almost all countries make up more than 50% of all battery sales. It's pretty amazing. In some countries, it's well over 60%. So the AA battery, in particular the alkaline variant, and we know that there's different chemistries available out there. The alkaline typically is the best bang for the buck, and it typically will yield somewhere between 2,500 and 28 milliamp hours of power. So, it's one of those things, that it's not too bad for what it is, for the size and the dimensions in particular. So, yes, you can go a little bit, in different directions here. A nickel metal hydride battery is around 2,500 milliamp hours. You can go with a lithium AA battery, which will typically yield, if it's a good name brand, between 2,800 and 3,000 milliamp hours. So you can just pick whatever you want there, but there's a reason why it's the number one selling battery. It's just really an optimum size and has a pretty decent output for what it is. And of course, it's at 1.5 volts for the alkaline. And the nickel metal hydride typically are between like 1.2 volts or 1.25 volts, something like that. And so that might make a difference depending on what you're using it for. AAA batteries are the second most common batteries in the world. And in fact, they make up the bulk of the second place. In terms of what's remaining outside of the AA batteries, AAAs make up almost the bulk of the rest. And so at the same time, you're getting a lot less power. I mean, a good quality AAA battery might yield at most like around 1,000 milliamp hours. So you're, in some cases, you're getting almost like about a third of the power of a AA. So just think about that. When you're picking gear, you can have almost 3 times more power if you have a AA versus a AAA. And in a survival situation, more power is going to be better if you have better run times and possibly even more performance out of your gear. Now let's look at 9-volt batteries. Now you got to remember this is a 9-volt versus a 1.5 volt for in comparison to a AA or a AAA alkaline battery. But at 9 volts, a 9-volt battery is typically yielding around 500 milliamp hours. And that's actually a really good quality 9-volt battery. There's actually quite a few that are like 375 in that range. So it's not bad when you do the configuration and do the math, and you actually compare it volt to volt. It's actually pretty comparable to a good quality alkaline battery. So it's not that the 9-volt batteries are low, but if your gear requires 9 volts to actually power it versus 1.5 volts, just be aware, that 9-volt batteries aren't like big powerhouse batteries. And then we move back to 1.5 volts in the C size and the D size batteries. A C battery typically will yield around 8,000 milliamp hours for a good quality battery, and also for a good quality battery for a D size, around 15,000 milliamp hours. Now there's some exceptions to the rules here. There's a few batteries that are a little bit higher than that. But I'm just saying for the average. Now, when we jump over to various other types of chemistries here, in particular lithium variants, we have like the CR123, which is a 3-volt battery, and that puts out about 1,500 milliamp hours and of capacity. And then we have the 18650, which is rechargeable, and it's runs around 3.7 volts. That's about 3,500 milliamp hours if you get like the top of the line. But a lot of them are like between like 28 to 3,000 milliamp hours. And then we also have, of course, like the 14500 battery, which is also rechargeable. That kind of runs around the 3.6 volts. And these really vary quite a bit just between, the brands and just what's available. But I mean, they can range between like 600 milliamp hours all the way up to 1,600 I've seen if you get like the top of the line batteries. So there you go. We have some comparisons there, and just a kind of a little bit of a bit of insight about the power factor of some of these. And when you look for example, like at the 18650, I mean, wow, that's a real powerhouse for what it is. So let's go ahead and go back to the electronics category here and talk about some of the actual electronics. And so given that there are certain batteries that are just more common and that are more powerful, when you look at your lights, and it could be a handheld light or a headlamp, when you look at your radios, when you look at your GPS devices, and you look at how they can interface with the power pack or a solar charger, these things all make kind of like a bigger picture issue to work with and to work through. So there are headlamps and handheld flashlights that use, for example, like 18650 batteries. There's radios now that they use 18650 batteries. There's like battery banks and power packs that actually are a combination of several in series of 18650 batteries. In terms of GPSs, I'm not really aware of any GPS There may be some that use 18650s, but for the most part, you could see though that if you can use 18650, and this is just an example, you may not want to use 18650. Maybe you just want to go with AA batteries. And you could certainly find, I believe, devices that would run AA batteries on all of these, right? But it's just kind of like a challenge for some people into preparedness to kind of like consolidate the battery type and try to have the same battery type that can run all their devices. So that if you have a battery that goes out, let's say in your GPS, you can pull batteries out of your, let's say, radio, because they use the same battery types as your GPS. You see, they can all be interused, if you have to use them because of whatever reason. I mean, in particular, if the battery goes out in one device, you can pull from another device to power that device. So anyways, enough of that. Let's go ahead and jump into navigation. Obviously, compass, map, and other things that you may want. And we have trauma kits, first aid kits. Definitely something you definitely want. Injuries happen typically when you're not even expecting it. Like you just wouldn't expect someone to get hurt and then they get hurt. I mean, think about how many times you've been on vacation and someone gets hurt on vacation. I mean, it's supposed to be a fun time and everybody's kind of letting their guard down and then bad things happen. So you just got to be careful. Folding camp stoves. I mean, definitely you could, if your food that you're bringing, which I'll talk about here in a minute, if your food requires cooking, then, some type of stove, it could be oil, based stove, or it could just be that you can just put some sticks in there, a little wood-based stove. They have some very, very small ones that kind of like self-collapse on itself. It's just an option. You could always just use a campfire, but sometimes little stoves are easy to work with, especially if you're trying to boil water in a little pot or cup. A fire source, matches, lighters, ferro rods, a multi-tool, and a camp knife, and a little folding saw can go a long way to help you. Cordage and tape. I mean, 550 paracord type 3 is very good. You have bank line. There's different types of bank line depending on how strong you want it. And then tape, like various types of duct tape really do pretty well. And I like Gorilla tape, just standard Gorilla tape. In terms of like bags, a lot of times what we have here is, a lot of times we want to insulate something or we want to waterproof something in particular that might be a little more sensitive. For example, it could be like our radio. Thick contractor yard bags or waste bags. It could even be like drum liner bags. 5 millimeter or thicker is a really good starting point. And you probably want a few extra spare ones just in case you need to use it for something unexpected. Maybe you just have to make a poncho out of it or something. Food. So going to food, obviously it's really kind of nice to have like more like snack food that has a range of nutrition and lots of calories. Gives you a lot of energy, and it's nice to have just stuff that's ready to be eaten and not have to be cooked. But in some cases, if you just have certain things that are like dehydrated or freeze dried, and you need to reconstitute that food, a bowl would be nice. It could just be like a really small titanium bowl or even a cup. You can cook in a cup, and a spork. Instead of having a fork and a spoon, you could just use a spork. Wire is really good. Not only just to help make shelters, but you can make traps and stuff with it if you had to. And early warning devices. The next thing is personal protection. Of course, it depends on where you live. There's a lot of people who watch my channel that are from like Europe, and owning a firearm is very difficult or almost impossible in some areas, if not impossible. And so maybe for you, a non-lethal option is just like your only option, really. So it could be even something as simple as just a small baseball bat that you can tuck away in your bag. It could be that you pepper spray, if that's even allowed in your area. I know a lot of places it's now been banned. And, it just depends on what you can have. Let's just end it like that. But definitely look at your options. And change of clothes. I think that's very important. You could get caught off guard. A rainstorm could hit you so fast that you don't even really have a chance to even put your rain gear on. So you want to have some dry clothes to change into. You don't want to be walking around in wet clothes all day. Zip ties, I'd get an assortment of sizes to make repairs, to make shelters. You could do a lot with zip ties. Bandanas, I'd probably have 2 or 3 of those. They almost weigh nothing, and they're just very, very handy as pre-filters, or as a, kind of to kind of keep, dust, if there's a lot of dust in the air, from being breathed in. Shamogs could be another thing, but for a lot of people, shamogs are just a little kind of bulky, and so they prefer bandanas. You could also use bandanas as like an improvised point of contact, point of contact for a sling, or for a wrap, or even a bandage. Also, head and eyewear, to have a good full brim hat of your choice. I like boonie hats. I like synthetic blend boonie hats, and I also like to have decent sunglasses that have the ability to resist impact. So basically, eye protection, impact resistant glasses. A pen and a pencil. In case the pen runs out, you can always just self-sharpen the pencil, and definitely need a notepad to make notes. This is all very common sense, this list, but if you're new to all this is kind of overwhelming. So, don't feel odd if you have to take notes about what I'm talking about. If you're totally new to this is like, whoa, I totally understand. I get this stuff all the time from people that are like, wow. And I remember myself, when I first got into preparedness, I would watch videos and just like take all kinds of notes. And it really was very helpful. You may want a blanket depending on what time of the year it is. And the thing about blankets is that if you're not experienced in going camping, you may just think, oh, I'll just grab a little cotton blanket off the bed, and, or maybe you just have one in the closet that you never use, and just roll it up and put it on the bottom of your pack, or just wrap it around your pack in some way. And that would be a big no-no. You want to avoid cotton, just like in like your change of clothes. You'd probably want to go with synthetic clothing. At the very most, maybe a synthetic blend, but honestly, I would go with 100% like polyester, for example, when it comes to clothing. And when it comes to your blanket, though, it could be like a polyester blend, but I honestly would rather go more toward wool. They have like wool and polyester wool blend blankets. That's going to be a lot better. Wool it kind of helps to keep the, your body temperature even more like consistent, even when it's cold and wet, than other types of materials. Like if you have a cold, wet, cotton blanket, it ain't going to really help you at all with keeping you warm. But with wool, it actually helps you. So, you don't want your blanket to get wet, but if it does, you're not going to lose all the properties to help you stay a little warmer. So there you got that. And then washcloths, 1 or 2 of those would be very nice to have in your bag. Some cash, and I'd even go so far as maybe a few pieces of bullion, maybe a few ounces of silver for barter or whatever. Toothbrush, of course, toothpaste of choice, deodorant, and some type of soap. I'd probably have like a little bar of soap, and then also maybe like some wet wipes, and then maybe even go so far as some type of alcohol-based hand sanitizer. So there you go. Now that's pretty much my list. Now, of course, at this particular point, once you have everything gathered, then you start to worry about the pack. And if you're going to use a backpack, then this is the time to kind of like go, okay, put all my stuff in a pile. So you put all these items in a pile, and anything else that I haven't spoke of that you want to add, you put it all together, and then you determine then what size bag you need. And typically speaking, you want to have at least a minimum of 20% extra space. So if you ever want to add something in the future, or maybe you just have a light jacket or a sweater that you want to take off and you want to put in the bag, you'll have some room to do that. So you never want to buy a bag that just barely can hold what you have. You want to definitely have some room. So the rule of thought on this, once again, is around 20%. Some people like to go as much as 30%, but at least 20%, and you'll have a little bit of breathing room, and your bag won't be so stressed out. Like it won't be so tight and full to the brim, and you probably won't, put as much wear and tear on the bag, if it's not so full. So there you go. Hope this helps. Hope these essentials get you to a better place of preparedness. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.